Hi guys, this is Nicole with Cozy Cloud Knits. Today I'm going to teach you how to create this large size chunky knit Mila Mushroom. So this tutorial will teach you step by step how to create the mushroom. If you prefer to have a PDF file to follow along with, I do have one available in my Etsy shop, so feel free to head over there if you feel that you need one. That will also include a small size, which is approximately 7 inches tall. So these are the two separate sizes here. This one is the large size. This is what it looks like underneath. And then I also have the smaller size here. So for this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to create the larger size one. So for supplies, we're going to need jumbo size 7 yarn. This kind is from Hobby Lobby. It's Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss. And you can see here this one is 28 yards in length. And then for other supplies, you're going to need polyfill. You're going to need scissors and a lighter if you plan to burn your ends of yarn together when you do a color change. And if you want to do a weighted mushroom to help it be freestanding, you can use a nylon and some weighted pellets, which I have linked in the PDF file. So to begin, we're going to start with our stem color. So I'm just using an ivory color, and you want to leave a tail end of yarn approximately 6 inches long, and then you're going to create your slip knot. So once you create your slip knot, you're going to create a chain of 9. So you're going to count the slip knot as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And we need to create a circle with our chain. So let's first double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Just make sure you have 9 loops in your chain. That last 9th loop, we're going to point in the upwards direction. That's actually going to be the first loop of row 1. So you're going to pull your tail from the starting chain around, and you're going to find the loop that's right below that 9th loop and pull it all the way through. So this is what your circle should look like. Your last loop is pointing in the upward direction. So we're going to count this as our first loop of row 1, and we're going to continue working towards the right. So this is loop 2, loop 3. Keep working around. You're going to find each chain space, and because this is a plushie and we're going to be stuffing it with polyfill, you want to make sure that your loops are on the smaller side and they're very close together so that none of the polyfill pokes through the holes. So that was you should have 8 loops total because we made that last loop the first loop in round 1. So you should have 8 loops total. I'm just putting a stitch marker on my final loop of row 1. So I knit 8 total so far. So I'm going to move on to row 2. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here's my last one where the stitch marker is. That's 8. Okay, so this brings us to the end of row 2. So I'm just going to continue knitting around 8 loops in each row until I get to 8 rows total. So you can either continue to use the stitch marker to mark off each row, or if you'd like, you can just count 64 loops total, and that will bring you to the end of row 8. Okay, so I'm just finishing off this row, and now I'm just going to check how many rows I have so far. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I need to do one more row so that I have 8 rows total. Okay, so here is the last stitch of row 8. So that should be 64 stitches total. Okay, so I'm just gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's 8. So now we know we have 8 rows total, and we're going to continue on working into row 9. So for row 9, we're going to knit 2 and decrease all the way around. So you're going to knit 2, and then you're going to decrease. So to decrease, you're going to take the next 2 loops, you're going to overlap one over the other and pull a loop through both of them. So you're combining the two loops to decrease. We're going to repeat those steps. So knit 1, 2, and then we're going to decrease again. So when you're decreasing, you should be able to see that your stitch marker is in that second loop. You're combining them to decrease, and then you're going to place your stitch marker back on your new loop, and that is the last loop of your row. So you want to double check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You should have 6 loops total at the end of row 9. So for row 10 and 11, you're just going to knit 6 loops. So if you prefer, you can use the stitch marker, or you can knit 12 loops total. So this is my last stitch of row 10, and I just need to do one more row with 6 loops. I want you to keep in mind that your loops should be nice and close together. You don't want to leave any gaps between them, because that's where the polyfill will be able to poke through the holes, and we don't want that. Okay, so here is my last stitch of row 11. And for the next row, we're going to do another decrease. So for row 12, we're going to knit 1, decrease, and repeat those steps. So you're going to knit 1 and take the next 2 loops and combine them by pulling a new loop through the 2 together. So there's your decrease. We're going to knit 1 and decrease again. Your final stitch here should be where the stitch marker is. And you're creating a new loop, and you can place your stitch marker on that combined loop. So you should have 4 stitches total now. Okay, so now we're going to be working into row 13. So for this row, we're going to repeat increase, knit 1. So you're going to find the space in between your 2 stitches, and you're going to pull up a new loop. So that is going to be your increase, and then you're going to find your loop that's next in line, and you're going to pull up a stitch. So that is just your knit stitch. Then we're going to increase again, so find that space in between the 2 loops and pull up a new loop, and then you're going to knit into the following loop. So you're going to continue to repeat this. So we're going to increase, find that chain space in between the 2 loops, pull up a new loop, and knit another one, and we're going to do this one more time. So you're going to find that space in between the loops, pull up a new loop, and you're going to knit 1. Make sure that you're using a stitch marker at this point, because it's really easy to lose track. So we're going to count all of our loops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you should have 8 loops total. And then for row 14, you're just going to knit 8. So this is my last loop of row 14, and then for row 15 we're going to increase and knit 1, and you're going to continue that all the way around. So again, to increase, you're going to find that space in between the loops, and you're going to pull up a new loop, and then you're going to keep working to the right. You're going to knit 1, and then you're going to increase, and then you're going to knit 1, and then you're going to increase. So continue doing this until you get to your stitch marker. Okay, and here is my last loop, so I'm just going to knit that one. So that is the end of row 15, and I'm just going to count all my loops. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There are a lot of loops here, so you can always double check, make sure that you have the right amount of loops. You should have 16 total. Okay, so for row 16, this is going to be the last row in our stem color. We're just going to knit 16 all the way around. So no increases, no decreases, just knit 16. Okay, so this is my last stitch of row 16. I should have 16 stitches total, and this is what your mushroom should look like so far. Okay, so now that we've finished our stem color, I'm just going to trim my working yarn right at the bottom of that final loop in the previous row, and I'm just going to trim it so that the bottom is clean and you can see that inner tubing. That way you can burn your two pieces of yarn together. And then I'm just going to take my mushroom cap color, so I'm going to be using this marigold yellow color, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other end of yarn. I'm just going to clean it up so I can see that inner tubing, and I'm going to burn the ends of both pieces of yarn and then gently fuse them together. So I typically just let it burn for a tiny bit, just until it looks like that inner tubing is melted. And then I use my fingers to just fuse the two together by gently squeezing them and slightly rolling them between my fingers to make it smooth. So this is what it looks like. So I'm going to continue working now into row 17. So for the next 6 rows, rows 17 to 22, I'm just going to knit 16. So if you want, like we've done in the past, we can continue doing each row, marking it off with a stitch marker, or you can just continue going all the way around until you count 96 stitches total. So I'm just going to keep going, and I will meet you back when you get to 96. Okay, so I'm just finishing up row 22 now, so I'm almost at 96 loops total. Before we start the next row, I just want to talk to you real quick about decreasing for the mushroom cap. You don't have to do this, it's optional, but I do find that it makes my mushroom cap more even, not as lopsided. So when we do decreases, you're going to notice that you can decrease right over left or left over right. So for each row of the mushroom cap, I like to alternate left over right and right over left. You'll see what I mean. So for this next row, row 23, we're going to knit 2 and decrease. So I knit 2, here's my first decrease. So I'm going to take my left loop and I'm going to place it over my right loop. Okay, if we wanted to do it the other way around, you could do the right loop over your left loop. That would be right over left. So for this one, we're going to do left over right, and it's a decrease. So you're combining them and pulling a loop through. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that. So you're going to knit another 2. You want to make sure that you're not leaving any slack. So if you notice here, there's a lot of slack. You don't want it to look like that. You want to make sure that you're pulling your loops close together and pulling up a new loop. So that's knit 1 and 2, and now we're going to do another decrease. So this is what I was talking about. We're going to alternate. So we did left over right for the first decrease. Now we're going to do right over left. So before we did it like this time I want you to take your right loop and put it over your left loop, and then we're going to pull the yarn through. Okay, so knit nice and close together. You're going to knit 2, and then we're going to decrease again. So we're alternating. So you're going to do left over right again. So take that left loop, place it over your right loop, and pull the yarn through to combine. So that's your decrease. We're going to knit 2, and we're going to decrease, alternating again. So you're going to take your right loop and you're going to place it over your left loop. Okay, so that is your final decrease of row 23. Okay, and like I said, you don't have to do this. You don't have to decrease in this way, but it does create a more even mushroom top, I find, if that makes sense. So it's really your own personal preference. So for row 24, we're just knitting 12 all the way around. Okay, so here is my last loop of row 24, and now we're going to work on to row 25. So for row 25, we're going to knit 1, decrease all the way around. Okay, so I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to do the same alternating decreases. So I'm going to do left over right to decrease. I'm going to knit 1, and I'm going to do right over left to decrease. I'm going to knit 1, and I'm going to do left over right, to decrease. I'm going to knit 1 and right over left to decrease. Okay, so you should have 8 loops total at the end of that row. And then for row 26, we're just going to knit 8 all the way around. Okay, so here is my last loop of row 26. And for row 27, we're going to knit 2 and decrease. So that's 1, 2, and do the same thing. Decrease left over right. And knit 2, 1 and 2, and decrease right over left. Okay, so that is the end of row 27, and you should have 6 stitches total now. Okay, so for the last row, row 28, we're just knitting 6 all the way around. Okay, so here's my last stitch of row 28. I'm just going to place that stitch marker back on there, and this is what it should look like so far. Okay, so now to finish off our mushroom, we're just going to leave a tail of yarn approximately 8 inches long, and you're just going to cut it. Then you're going to take that tail end of yarn and you're going to weave in and out through all the loops, so from the inside out through all 6 loops at the top of your mushroom. Make sure you go through your last loop with the stitch marker on it, and then you're just going to gently pull so that the top of your mushroom closes. And what I normally do is I try to take that tail end of yarn and I gently press it right through the center of my mushroom top. This part can be a little tricky. Just do the best you can to get it right through the center. So now I'm just going to reach my hand in through the bottom. This center piece can be a little hard to get your hand through. I'm just going to grab onto that tail end of yarn and I'm going to pull it all the way down. That way I can secure that mushroom top in place. So for this part, it's kind of your own personal preference. I like to pull mine almost all the way down. That way it secures the cap down in place and it kind of creates this cute little underside of the mushroom. But it's really up to you. If you want your mushroom to look like it has a puffier top, you can leave it a little looser. You want to just make sure you don't pull too tight, otherwise it's going to pull the whole center all the way down. But you can kind of just play around with it and see how you like it to look. And then what I normally do is I take that tail end of yarn from my starting chain and I push it through that next twist to the left just to secure it, and then I tie a double knot between the two ends of yarn, and then I just tuck that right in the center. So this is what my mushroom looks like so far. If you need, like I said, if you need to adjust it at all, just kind of use your hands to adjust it. And then we just need to fill our mushroom with polyfill and tie off the bottom. So I'm going to show you how I like to tie off the bottom. If you prefer to, you can use your tail end of yarn and you can go through all the twists all the way around like you normally would close off any other type of plushie. But I prefer to use a stronger piece of yarn. So this is just a worsted piece of yarn, but you could use macrame string, you could use a thicker piece of yarn. It's really whatever you prefer. So I push it right through one of the twists. You can start anywhere you'd like. And I just work my way, weaving all the way around from the outside in through all of those twists, working in the counterclockwise direction. So do the best you can to make sure that you get your string or yarn through all of the twists. And once you meet your starting point, you're just going to trim your yarn. And then you just need to stuff your mushroom before you tie it all the way off. So you can take your polyfill. I try not to overstuff the mushroom. I try to make sure that I go all the way up to the starting point of the stem, which is where you decrease to 4 stitches around. It's going to feel like it's the tightest part of the top of the stem. I usually start stuffing at that point and work my way down. So you can add a little bit at a time until you get how you like the look of it. And I'm just going to show you another option. So if you want to have a weighted mushroom, I find that this works best with the smaller size mushroom, but if you add a decent amount of the weighted beads, then it will stand up. This amount here is probably slightly too little. I would probably use this amount for a small mushroom, but just so you can understand how to do it, I usually just use the nylon, fill it with the weighted beads, and then knot it a couple times just to be sure that the beads are secure in there. And also, as a side note, I would never recommend this for any babies, even toddlers. I would probably say at least 3 years of age or older, just in case the nylon were to pop and those beads were to come out, because your yarn is not gonna keep those beads inside. So I like to put that weighted ball right at the bottom. So it looks like this. And once you feel that your mushroom is stuffed to the point that you like it, you're just going to tie off your yarn to close that circle. I usually make sure that I do a double knot to be sure that it's secure in place. And then I just tuck my ends inside of my mushroom. So lastly, I just use my hands to shape the mushroom, and that is what your large Mila mushroom should look like. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and as always, feel free to message me if you have any questions and tag me on social media. I always love seeing your creations. And if you prefer to have a written PDF file for the large and small Mila mushrooms, I do have a PDF available for download in my Etsy shop at www.cozycloudknits.com.